The magic of acoustical engineering. Welcome everybody to our first Opera in Conversation for the season. My name is Lauren Medici. I'm the Director of Engagement Programs at Opera Omaha, and we are delighted to be here in partnership with Johnson Castle for our first Opera in Conversation for Don Pasquale. Up here with me, I have our wonderful conductor, Gary Thor Wedow, and Octavio Cardenas. Did I say I said that?
Cardenas, but he said some wrong many times in everywhere that
As I understand, I'm sorry. I apologize. I will get it right next time. Our wonderful director and conductor for the show, and so we're going to dive in a little bit to some insights and background to Don Pasquale. And as this program is called Opera in Conversation, it is a conversation. So there will be plenty of time at the end for questions and your insights, and we really want to hear from you about what are you dying to know. So this conversation is called Inspiration, Process, and Insights. So we'll start a little bit from the space of inspiration and process, thinking about how do both of you approach an opera and preparing for an opera and preparing for Don Pasquale?
I always look at the text first. I look at the story, I read the text, then I look at the composer, what the composer's attitude was toward the text. In Don Pasquale's case, he took an already existing libretto, which was the custom of the time, and then he hired a poet to rework it for his taste, but the poet he hired, who was a friend of his, Donizetti, kibitzed so much with the rewriting of the libretto that the poet refused to let his name be used. So I found that very interesting. The libretto is really shaped by the composer. And that is, I feel, an insight into how the music is shaped. And Donizetti is like at this point in his life, was like a very good cook who knew what he had in the fridge or in that paper bag, and he used every bit of it exactly to make it as beautiful and as fabulous an opera as he could. But I start with the text because that's where the music grows from.
How do you start the process?
I also start with text. I spend a lot of time reading whatever information I get about the story, the composer, the style. Then after that, I start incorporating the music. Then on my own, I act every single character. I mean, if somebody has a camera in my room, because I start doing all of the characters, and I do physically, and I move around. That way, I have an outline when I go to rehearsal. But not every character has my body frame. Not every singer has a body frame. So then I see what they do when they're rehearsing, and I adapt what I had in my mind to what they are doing, and sometimes what they're doing is much better. And so I start like just skating. I see how they react, and that's my process.
I think it's interesting that both of you start with the text separately before you dive into the music. So thinking about the music growing from the libretto and growing from the text, Gary, can you tell us a little bit about this composer and what makes him so special?
Yes, absolutely.
In an entire, I'm sorry, I just asked you to give an entire, like, semester-long course in one question.
But this is 3 hours long.
Sure, yeah.
I think it's very interesting. You know, he was born into absolute poverty. And he was a product of a free music education. The town of Bergamo had a free music school that was run by a very great composer and conductor, Simone Meyer. And if you are opera fanatics, Simone Meyer actually wrote many great operas himself. Medea of Meyer was favored by Callas, and there are a couple of recordings of that. And he chose Donizetti because he saw his incipient talent. And so Donizetti got, as a young man, this incredible education and classic education. He learned composition from the ground up, and he eventually studied with a disciple of the man who had taught Mozart. So that says a lot. And so I always tell people, I told the orchestra this afternoon, Donizetti had his roots in the 18th century, in classical music, in structure, in symmetry, in form, but he blossomed into romanticism. And so there's this incredible, beautiful symmetry, but then there's this wild emotional content. And Don Pasquale is his great comedy. So there's this crazy, who knows what's going to happen next. And Donizetti, as a person, was the most wonderful human being. He loved pranks, he loved laughter, he loved staying out late. He was probably one of the best people to be around you can imagine. And so much of that is in the music, I feel, and in his choice. He chose the libretto, he chose the subject matter, so I feel it's all, you can't separate it. You can't separate the music from the text. It's the word became the music, and they're united. I can go on.
Well, I know. I love the way that you describe the training in the music, but also as a person. This
Yeah.
human created this
Yeah.
this wonderful piece of opera, and it's part of their experience. Octavio, you talked a little bit about how that humanity is also in this comedy and in those characters. Could you dive into that a little bit more?
Sure. This is my first Don Pasquale. I'm diving here for the first time in this piece, and people always tell me, "Oh, it's so funny. It's comedy." But when I was reading it and studying it, I found it more of a melodrama. There's a lot of elements that make it very human. This is a person who is starts feeling old, but gets a second chance to feel young, and he's taking advantage of that. I want to feel young again. So I found that very human, very I see it. I see it in reality, and I see. So I wanted to make all the characters sympathetic because of that. It was so easy to make the characters around Don Pasquale, I'm sorry for the word, but jerks. So it has been very important to me to make them all sympathetic. And so if I play everything for comedy, it doesn't work for me. It is funny because the way it's written. It is very funny. Situations are hilarious, but there is a lot of really beautiful, heartfelt moments in this piece, and that's probably my concept of the piece.
We've been joking about this idea of concept, but also both of you come into this piece of really wanting to honor the masterpiece of as it is. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of feeling of responsibility that you have when you're coming in to direct or conduct a piece?
Yes, I mean, well, first of all, opera is the king of, I feel, of all art forms. It is George Bernard Shaw said, opera is an art form that tries to combine 5 art forms, which is 4 art forms too many. And I think when you're working in the middle of it, you totally agree. It's like, and so I feel you're all supporters of the opera, and I'm all phenomenally grateful to you. Opera, therefore, is a very expensive art form. So I feel an incredible responsibility when I come to work to make it work and to not waste time and to make it the best we can make it. On the other hand, there's so many words connected to the theater, the word play. And so if you don't make it fun for the participants, the actors, the singers, imagine, I mean, you know, the old picture of the conductor, no, it must be faster, you're flat, and who told you you could be a singer? And imagine being able to sing after that. So I feel it's also my responsibility to create an atmosphere where people can fail, people can experiment, people can grow, including me. And so it's an incredible balance. And one of the things I love about my job is the curtain goes up October 28th? 27th. Oh, glad you corrected me. The curtain goes up October 27th, and that is very stimulating. It's not like, oh, we're going to delay this vote in the Congress. Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I should have said political things. But we have a deadline, and we have to get it done. And so we have this feeling of we're going to have a relaxed, creative atmosphere, but we're going to get Act 1 done by today. And we're going to make sure that everybody can do their job, and the costumes are going to be done, and we may have to stay up all night to make sure all the hems are hemmed. And so it's this wonderful, stimulating feeling. And now I forget what the question was. So that kind of answer, yeah.
I think so. And I think that's also, it's always interesting about, you know, what does your rehearsal room look like? How do the two of you collaborate in that space and in that way?
Just sorry, I have to 100% collaboration. One of the things we do, I mean, we have to start placing the singers, letting them know where they're going to go. One of the things I like to do is I block it left, right, you sit here, because otherwise the singers they cannot concentrate really the drama until they know where they're going. So we do that, then of course I pass the song to maestro, then we do the music, and then if something doesn't work, we go back to the staging, and then once set, we go back to the music, and we just go 50-50 until the end of the rehearsal. And we do the notes, something works, it just doesn't work. If we find something that worked better, we go for it, or something just like an experiment didn't work out, then we try something else. But as Master said, we have a deadline. We try to make it fun during the day, we joke, we laugh, but we know that by the end of the day, we have to have a certain amount of pages done.
You've got your goals.
Yes.
You got to hit them.
Yes.
Great. Are there things that when you're in a rehearsal process, you both talked about how you're inspired by the text. Are there other pieces of information or parts of your kind of research process that you draw upon as you're preparing or as you're in a rehearsal process when you're in that role?
Oh, I love to know what, I do a lot of Handel. And there's a wonderful new book about Handel called, it's by Ellen Harris, who's a Handel scholar. And believe me, I'm coming back to Donizetti. It's called A Life Among Friends. And we don't know a lot about Handel's personal life because he was a very private man. But we know a lot about his friends because there were a couple of diarists. They wrote down everything they did every day. They were very public people, and so we know a lot about Handel through his diaries. And one of the interesting things about the book is laid out opera per opera per opera per opera. And, you know, you think, Handel, what weird operas, Julius Caesar, who wanted to know an opera about Julius Caesar? Well, it was, there, just like today, there was turmoil in the Middle East. So everybody was interested in Egypt. And then there were the constant Turkish invasions. So he wrote Turkish operas. Well, I feel it's the same way with Donizetti. He wrote an opera that was about a subject that was popular to the public of the day. So he wrote operas like, I'm trying to think, like you'd write an opera about Harry Potter. Or you'd write an opera about Taylor Swift and her private relationships. And that people would want to come and see and would know about. And I think with Don Pasquale, this idea of a bachelor being fooled, a wealthy bachelor, and, you know, the clever young woman, and I think it was a subject of the time, and there was already another opera, and Donizetti who could do it better. And so it's one of these things where these operas just didn't come out of thin air. They came out of the soil of the time. They were really products of the time. And what I love about, well, one of the many things I love and respect about Octavio is he's putting people on the stage that you would meet on Dodge Street or here sitting next to you in this meeting. They're people of today. That hasn't changed. So I love knowing what was going on, what inspired Donizetti to choose this opera, and then who did he cast? He cast these great singers, and he knew he could. So, you know, when you're going to cast the greatest singers in the world, what do? You write virtuosic music for them. So, yeah, it's, yeah.
Are there, you mentioned this space of it being of its time, but now also translating to now. Can we talk a little bit more about what are the elements or themes that you feel translate to 2023 and are present and relevant?
I think the elements that we can take, that we can identify with them, is just the humanity of each character. You know, we have the protagonist, Don Pasquale, who is getting to the end, and probably the last chapter of his life. He wants back to what we had before, maybe a house full of kids, a house full of laughter. He wants to feel young again. I see that in my father when I go visit him anytime. That every time he goes out to have a party or something, his eyes are just full of life again. So it's not that I'm going to do the production. I call this done in the 23rd century, 21st century, 2023. But what I do is, what I am concentrate on is the characters are people, as Master said, that you see every single day. Ernesto and Norina are two people who are young, don't have too much money, they want to get married, and they have this friend who's going to help them figure it out because the uncle has certain ideas because of his generation that are not helping them, so they are just trying to, without taking advantage of each other, to better make the situation better for themselves. This production is not like completely modern, but the characters are somebody you would see in real life.
A big element of this opera and that humanity is that it's comedy. And I don't remember which one of you said it or both of you said it, but comedy is hard. Can you talk a little bit about when you're staging it and as a director and those choices, what is there guidance that you give or how do you work with that?
There are sometimes.
Exactly.
Is this a secret reveal of parts of this production that nobody knows? There's bagpipes. You're ready?
Stop it.
Although that timing was
It was pretty amazing. Yeah, really.
exactly.
But you know, the music tells so much of the story.
Yeah.
So very good. Very good.
Unexpected bagpipes. Did anybody have that on their bingo card for this evening? No?
It shouldn't count that on. We have a bagpiper in the closet.
Okay, great. We'll see what our next musical selection happens to be. Well, you were saying that if you walk in another room, you hear the
Yes.
elements of music that tells you, oh, this is what's
Yes,
happening.
and in Don Pasquale, you hear this music, and so much of it is funny. But I think what is maybe the funniest thing in Don Pasquale is Donizetti wrote more tragedies than he wrote comedies. Well, I'm sorry, I can't resist saying it now. I hope it doesn't activate it again, but Lucia di Lammermoor is his and so what Donizetti does is he codified the tragic opera tropes, the dramatic chords and the what? You're rejecting me? And all of these things that we recognize in opera seria and tragic opera. And in Don Pasquale, he turns it on its head. And I love to tell people a little bit of opera trivia nerdishness. I don't know if we have any Gilbert and Sullivan fans, fanatics, or, oh good. Well, Sullivan, as a young man, one of his first jobs was as an editor for the Novello Publishing Company to do a new edition of all the great Italian operas. So if you look at 19th century Novello editions of Italian operas edited by Arthur S. Sullivan. And so how did Arthur know so well how to parody Italian opera? But he knew these operas backwards and forwards. And he knew all of the, he knew all of those, and of course Donizetti knew them just as well. So one of the things I love, and what we've worked very hard on is, wait a minute, this is a serious moment, and you must sing it beautifully. And we had great singers, oh my word. We had the tenor and the soprano come today to the orchestra. orchestra rehearsal. We had our first reading. And I feel it informs the orchestra, because in bel canto often the orchestra plays. And you know, the singer has the melody, so they get to hear what's going on, and it lifts them and inspires them. But we've had so much fun taking these serious moments that then to the audience, I hope, are going to be very funny.
Are there moments that for you are different in your process when you're conducting a comic piece or a drama, or is your process the same?
Well, I think the process is pretty much get the notes right, be accurate, don't let the flock stray too far from the field. And then, of course, you know, we talked the other day, I love working with Octavio for so many reasons. One is he's so precise about language and about in how he speaks to the actors. And I said, in this section, there are a couple of ensembles where kind of time stops. And there are very few places where all four singers sing together. It's very thrifty. It's like the big Christmas present. Here we'll give you some socks. Here we're going to give you some batteries. But this is the fire truck. And I said, I want it very mannered. I don't want it natural. Well, I said I want it very mannered. I want the rhythms exaggerated, and I want the musical shapes and the dynamics. And Octavio said, what is the opposite of mannered? And I couldn't quite put it into words, but it's natural. It's, you know, we act naturally today. This has nothing to do with anything.
Yes, it does.
Years ago, I started out as a chorus master in Santa Fe, and we had a wonderful British director, John Copley, and he said, we were doing Traviata, he said, the next rehearsal on stage, we're going to have a frock rehearsal. Everybody said, a frock rehearsal? Yes, a frock rehearsal. I want the ladies to wear their corsets and their frocks, and I want the gentlemen to wear their tailcoats. And people said, oh, this is, what a ridiculous waste of time. We'll have to call in the dressers. He said, look it. He said, you have a chorus of 22 years old, and all they ever wear are blue jeans and sneakers. So I want them learning how to wear corsets and panniers and hoop skirts. And it was the funniest rehearsal I've ever seen in my life, because they didn't know how to sit down without their skirt going down, and the men had no idea how to get close to the ladies, and the ladies had no idea how to let the men get close to them. So it was 3 hours of showing them how to sit down, how the men got close to the ladies, and it was a brilliant use of time. And of course, apprentice programs are training programs. So he really
Let's face it, you have to learn how to embody the character
Yes.
that you're going to be in the body of for that length of time. Or you have to figure out what Octavio was doing in his apartment by himself and how that translates to your own body.
Oh, to have been a fly.
I closed the curtains. Nobody was allowed.
So how does that, for you, how does that translate when you're in the room and thinking about how your you might physically embody a character, and then you meet singers, and maybe that's totally different for them.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I mean, they don't have the same body frame that I have, so they move differently, so I have to adapt. But one thing that I am very interested when I work with this, especially in this production, and I try to just do a little bit of it. Sometimes the singers try to approach this work with a method in mind, as Stanislavski, you know, the things we grew up, movies, that acting technique, and they try to intellectualize it, and what is my motivation, all these things. But the problem is that didn't exist when Donizetti wrote this thing. The whole piece is written with commedia dell'arte or Elizabethan theater in mind, and you can hear it in all the chords. The whole score, it's a line reading, and it's telling you what to do physically. All the score poems telling you need to sit, you need to stand up, you need to sneak in. And if you follow what the music is telling you instead of analyzing every single thing, it's there. So I try to help them understand that it's actually easier. It's easier than the way that we usually do it. So I try to make them understanding when do they have to be looking at the character, when that idea needs to go to the audience, because not everything has to be to the person you're talking to. You're describing something, you have to describe it towards the audience, so the audience sees, or you have a reaction to something that has been said to you, the audience needs to see that reaction, not the character, and that's the difference between that acting technique. So I try to do as much as possible to make them just understand how that style works.
For those of you who saw our last production of last season, Marriage of Figaro, and you're going to see Don Pasquale first, both of them have those media tropes and those stock characters in there. So that's my prompting to you to think about comparing, contrasting, if you're seeing some of those same media characters and styles. If you want to dive in, we just put up our student study guide online if you really want to nerd out, and highlighted the commedia, which characters you might see in this opera. So I always get excited when we talk about that space. And since they're right next to each other, you can think about what you saw in this one. I'm mindful of time, and I did promise we'd open it up for questions. Before we do that, is there anything that we haven't touched on yet that either of you are really dying to make sure that everybody knows?
I think we touched everything.
I love Omaha. I think it's a great city. Everyone is so nice here. It's wonderful. Don't let this get around. But the orchestra was so nice to me. It was like, really? Are you an orchestra member? Are you sure? No, they're terrific, and they're terrific players. So I wanted to say
And this
that.
is your second time in Omaha in the last couple of years.
Yes, recently my second. It's my fourth time actually working in Omaha, but back a long time ago. And it's funny. I know a couple of players from Juilliard. I know a couple of players from Indiana University. So it's really exciting to see them making their professional path in the professional world.
That's great. And it's much warmer. Last time you were here in February.
Oh, it was horrible. I mean, it was cold.
It's okay. We all are aware that February in Omaha is a
Well,
commitment.
I'm originally from Indiana, so.
You're fine. Yeah. Okay.
Same thing.
Midwest winter, you
Yeah.
knew what you were getting
I
into.
know about it.
So I want to open it up to our audience for if you have questions, things you're dying to know about Don Pasquale, about the opera, about what you've heard so far.
Well, this may be in the guide that you mentioned, the student guide, but I'm very interested, since you gentlemen are both informed by the text, what is the story that Don Pasquale is based on? It's not Shakespeare or a Greek drama, so where does the story come from? Is it commedia dell'arte exclusively, or where does it originate?
He thought he's from a play, from a theater play, you know the play.
Ben Jonson,
Oh, it's Ben Jonson.
The Silent Woman. And it's Richard Strauss used the same subject for Die Schweigsame Frau. which is the same story, but a kind of, And I think it's even, there's something that precedes that, but I'm sorry, I don't know. Die Schweigsame Frau is a fabulous opera. It's another fabulous opera. Completely different, but kind of the same.
Other questions?
I'm just kind of trying to process the rehearsal process. You, Gary, rehearse with the singers and a pianist probably, and
Yes.
you rehearse with the orchestra. And you are probably there directing how the staging goes, and it all somehow comes together. We add the orchestra to the whole thing later, and
It's like a Tetris game.
yeah.
It is, because
That
we
is
have-
so
we haven't
amazing.
added the chorus yet.
Yeah.
That's coming this weekend.
Chorus
so-
is coming yet,
Chorus,
okay.
so we have we have worked with the solos, the orchestra, but now we have I have not worked with the chorus yet. So that's the next element we are adding to the Tetris.
Okay, well, it's all important.
It is as
I kind of love
layered
the
as we're
process
thinking.
of how it all comes together. Yeah.
We start, the first day is traditionally music. We do music the first day. We go through the opera. I make suggestions. I tell people I'm here to take your measurements. I want it to be like a couturier, so that what is the prayer, God give me the serenity to, okay, well, I bet I can change that. I'm not gonna be able to change that, so we'll live with that. And you see, and then I give them my ideas, and they can't often in one day change completely, but they can marinate. And I also feel the music ideas don't really come to fruition until they start doing it with the drama. And there are conductors, unfortunately, some more famous conductors who, will fly in and fly out, and they won't be there in the room when things are staged. But actually, I think that's where the real music making happens. And then around the stagings, we do one-on-one musicals with the singers to tighten things or to adjust things. And of course, Octavio is very gracious and generous and wise. And he gives us time because there's so many ensembles, and I think there are 5 duets in Don Pasquale. And when one singer is singing by themselves, that's okay. And then 2 people singing together, they have to coordinate. And then there's a trio, and then there's a quartet. And so, and it's been marvelous. And also, all 4 of our singers are excellent musicians. So, but my work never stops. It's I'm always behind the scene, kind of whispering corrections. And another thing about Octavio is I asked him a couple of times to, Octavio, they're so
That's
far
up.
apart. Well, in so many words, maybe, but no, it's collaborative. It's been amazing. It's been great.
Did
So,
you guys work together before, or is this your first time?
First time.
First time, I mean, we met
Yeah.
at the moment, but we never worked together.
We've been to many pizza parties, but.
I'm curious, as you're working this out with your shades down, your Are you making notes to yourself all along?
My score is full of notes that nobody can read but me. Yeah, I make notes, I make, okay, this is the reaction, this is maybe what the character is thinking, they're reacting to this, and it's like arrows, it's a map that I can, sometimes not even myself can understand. But yeah, I write everything down. It may look like I'm improvising, but I'm not. Everything's on the paper.
So I think this, both of you guys answer it both in your own way with music and staging. One, I always hear this kind of opera compared with the Barber of Seville, this kind of the twilight of the opera buffa. And I was wondering how much of this, grand tradition of this kind of influences one, the way you conduct the score, or your interpretation, the way you stage it, even if you're trying to put your own flavor into this production. Do you feel constrained by having to show and highlight that kind of history of opera buffa at the kind of the end of it, or is it more it kind of plants you and you kind of get inspiration into going new directions with it?
I have never, for some reason, I have never felt constraints. I know what you're talking about, but I've never felt that. I actually feel the other way, that I can't, it allows me, because of, I have the knowledge of that style, but I also have the knowledge of today's style, and I can combine both. And I don't like to oh, this is the best one, this is the best one. I think both styles can get combined. You can get a very, very, very wonderful, nice product without ignoring or considering one less than the other. I think both of them, I try to take elements of both and combine them to make one product.
I know I think you're very right in bringing that up, that it's often called the kind of high point, the grand finale of the opera buffa tradition. And in some ways, it is. The world changed, and tastes changed. But I tried to become Donizetti. So, what was it? I forget who sang it, but love the one you're with, love the one you're with. Yeah, I feel, you can only be where you are at that moment. And for me, I can't, Donizetti didn't know what was coming next. And I was talking with our wonderful pianist, Gordon Shermer, the other day, and he's a walking encyclopedia of opera. And he said, that's right out of Nabucco. And I said, oh, wow, you're right. And he said, did Donizetti know Verdi? Did Verdi know Donizetti? Well, Verdi certainly knew Donizetti, and I did a little research. Later the year that Donizetti wrote Don Pasquale, Donizetti conducted Nabucco in Vienna. So he knew what was coming after him, but he wasn't really part of it because he died, I think, just 3 years after he wrote Don Pasquale. So he didn't know it was the end of opera buffa, and had he lived another 10 years, he maybe would have written another opera buffa.
That wouldn't have been the last. So
And it wouldn't have been the last.
Interesting, great question.
Yeah.
I was aware that Donizetti had written Don Pasquale toward the end of his life, but it's also my understanding that his health was failing, his wife had died, and seemed like pretty miserable circumstances. Do you have thoughts about how he was still able to create such beautiful and lighthearted, inspiring, and funny works even though he was going through all of that? Is it a case of him cooking from the pantry, basically like you mentioned before, or was it something else about him?
I think by nature, he was a well, maybe not saying an optimist, but he was a very hard worker, and he was a very fluent worker. The legend is he wrote Don Pasquale in 12 days, and that's just not true. He probably sketched it out in 12 days, and then there are 3 pieces that are earlier pieces that he actually had to send away for the last chorus. The last big chorus number was a piano piece that he had written, and he didn't have it with him, and so he had to send away to a countess that he'd given it to. So, so I think he was a hard worker, and he was a dedicated musician. This is what I do, this is my life's work, and I'm going to keep doing it. And his final illnesses, they didn't come all at once. So I think though he had some debilitating illnesses, then he had moments where he regained his health, and I think he loved what he did, and that carries you through a lot. And he was so successful, and he was surrounded by supporters and friends. And what better way to go through life? And so, yeah, I think that's what carried him through. And there are many instances of artists going through tragic circumstances, writing, painting beautiful things as a reaction. So, I don't know. That's a very good question, and I'm going to have to look into that more. But yes, I think it's a bond of this creative activity and beauty is something we can't let go of.
You have time for one last question? Yeah.
No one else. When you talked about blocking, I think my experience, I used to be a musician, so I was in the orchestra, and I always wondered a lot about when you come and do a production, are you pretty set on your blocking and stage setting, or is this something that you actually do have some fluidity and you kind of have moments of inspiration while doing it? And how do you come up with those decisions of blocking? Is it from other productions you've seen, or the story you want to tell? I'm just fascinated by how you block. Like, how do you make those decisions? Because I don't know because I always find that being like, how do you, there's so much options to do. And then also realize, music also being a part of it, where they're singing and stuff. And I know that's obviously your secret sauce, but.
A long time ago, I asked a very famous director, how do you get all the ideas? Because productions that are very outlandish and wonderful. And like, I steal them all. And it's like, everything has been done. So the Greeks did it all. So there are no new ideas. So all you do is you make them your own. You put certain elements to make them your own, but and everything has been done already. But what I try to do is I look at the situation. What is the, for example, the room what do I have? Chairs. Okay, this is the set I have. What in the situation? What will people be doing? Okay, for example, the scene is about an interview, so we're going to have 3 people. So of course I'm going to have 3 people right here. And so I start with the obvious. This is what I'm going to do. But I'm not very rigid. I have an outline, an idea, an imagination. Maybe he's going to stand up here. He's going to go here because of this. He wants this. He needs to get here. He's offended. He needs to leave the room, or something like that. But then I get to the rehearsal room, and I start seeing how people react to it, and I I'm okay with modifying sometimes the original idea I have. And I write down, okay, now the singer is doing this instead of this, and I write it down. But I think when I come to direct, I cannot be completely rigid. This is my show. It never works that way. I've seen, when I was an assistant, and I saw directors behaving like that, I saw that it doesn't work. The singers are a lot like robots. So you have to let them know. What I do though, is you see the singers, you have to understand the situation. I don't care if you're sitting down in the wrong place. But if you are having a conversation with somebody, we need to understand what the conversation is about. You can have a whole opera with two people sitting, and that's all you need. So I don't care. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't stand up. I don't care. It was awesome. Just keep it going that way. It's not about sitting up or standing up or moving to one side to the other. It's not about that. It's about the music and what is the story. So once we start rehearsals, I start with the outline, and then we just move and adapt. Yeah.
So I'm not allowed another question, but I have one. How
I'll give you
early
a
on
second.
do you start working with the scenic designer to make sure that all the elements that you need so that people are communicating with each other and moving with each other are there? And you work with you.
There are two kinds of situations. One in which I'm provided with something that's already done, so I just have to study what's already this production and somebody else designed it, and that's why I need to see what they do and I adapt to it. But when I have the opportunity, like for example, a year in advance, I talk to the costume design, the set designer, this is the idea, this is the time frame, this is what I need, and they go and do their own, and then we come back together and we talk, and it's a collaboration.
I will say, we're still getting production notes on a daily basis about, you said about chairs. We have to change a chair. This chair's not right. So that's also an email I enjoy receiving every day. And I'm like,
More chairs.
what's happening in the rehearsal room? Excellent. Well, before we leave, I just want to close with, for either of you, is there a moment musically or on stage or as part of the opera that you are really excited about or looking forward to, or want our audience who's here because they've been part of this conversation, that they'll get the little inside scoop of something to look for or listen to?
Everything. So it's wonderful. The things that I cannot pinpoint like, oh, they need to look up for this. I think it's just like, in my case, like everything. It's beautiful music, beautiful singing, wonderful singers, wonderful conductor, wonderful orchestra.
Well, wonderful director, wonderful opera, wonderful singer, but I do have one special moment, and can I give the plot away?
We put the synopsis on the website, so
Okay,
I mean,
good.
there's not really spoiler alert.
Okay, well, you know, she slaps Don Pasquale, and quite frankly, I think he deserves it. I was going into the rehearsal the other night with a new cast member, the man who plays the notary, and I said, hello, I'm Gary, and he said, oh, are you in the opera? I said, yes, I'm in the opera. He said, oh, I bet you play Don Pasquale. I said, no, I'm the conductor. But the moment after he slaps Don Pasquale, you will hear the four singers sing, I think, one of the most beautiful Italian melodies ever written, in unison. And it is breathtaking, and it's filled with humanity and beauty, and then it kind of branches out. Everybody has their own line. And so for me, that's the heart musically of the opera. And it's kind of, it's not right in the middle of the opera. It's not like the B minor mass where it's right in the middle of the opera. But it really is the heart. It's really beautiful. So I would listen for that. He gets slapped, and then tune your ears.
Triggers to the
Wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Octavio and Gary, for sharing so
Thank you
much
for having
about
us.
your behind the scenes. For those of you who are here, I hope you'll join us next week on Tuesday. We will have visual artist Nathaniel Rulo, who created all of our beautiful Opera Omaha season artwork. You're seeing what he created for Don Pasquale there. We'll have those originals here, and he'll be giving an artist talk about his inspirations and his process and how he created those pieces of art. So I hope that you'll join us next Tuesday at 6. And then also, as you leave, there's a flyer with all of the events surrounding Don Pasquale. We'll have one note, our third opera conversation, we're usually on Tuesdays. I am not competing with Halloween. So we will be on Monday the 30th for our artist response after the curtain call opera conversation on Monday the 30th. And all of those will be here at Jocelyn Castle. Another thank you to Jocelyn Castle for having us in this wonderful space and partnering with us for this series of events. So thank you all so much for being here. Have a great rest of your evening, and I hope we'll see you next week.